I've been driving for 30 some odd years, and I've never come that close to dying over and over and over and over.
And getting in an accident in a rental car in Mexico, right, Trevor? It's also no bueno.
An accident and a car chase.
I could sense that the energy was so different compared to the other sites that we went to. And I just had such a powerful spiritual experience. It was like living inside a deja vu.
Video doesn't go viral. Nothing that we ever do will go viral.
Welcome into another episode of Zion Media. I am here with Trevor the Key Keys, David the Lion Douglas, and Lance Weaver. I feel like this, seriously, Lance is like the fourth member of our broadcast. We have him on all the time. And we just spent, honestly, one of the coolest memories or situations or experiences of my life in Mexico with Lance. And truthfully, it wouldn't have been the same without him. We would have been lost, not knowing what to do, where to go. And it was like having a walking ChatGPT with us as it related to anything geological. I mean, I didn't even have to use ChatGPT. I had Lance right on the hip with everything. And I learned, yeah. Oh, well, I heard that he did drive, whether or not you guys made it in one piece. So, but I can tell you that there are people that were in the back seat of that car, not to mention any names, David Gutierrez, but he was holding on, he said, for dear life. But he made it. I am a very risk adverse person when I drive. I listen, and I don't want any trouble with the law either. I've had my fill of trouble with the law, so I go the speed limit pretty much. And, it was an adventure. And we had this newly minted bishop and his wife. They were in the back seat of the car I was driving. And, word to the wise, do not drive from Mexico City to Oaxaca. Listen, don't do it. It's not worth it. You don't need to do it.
Dark.
Especially in the dark. You don't need it. You just don't need to do it. Let me tell you why you don't need to do it. Because there's things called airplanes, and they can fly you from Mexico City to Oaxaca in about 35 minutes for about $100. And, when we were looking at the map, we're like, oh, it's only a few hundred miles. It shouldn't be that long. It should only be like 3 hours, until you find out that it's a 1 lane on each way road, winding through the mountains.
Over the continental divide.
Over the head of Sidon. Now we know why the head of Sidon is such a formidable obstacle. It's intense.
My goodness. And not that it's a 2-lane road, because they make it into kind of a 4-lane road because people drive on the shoulder on each side. It's just, it's chaos. They don't even stop signs.
I want everyone to imagine that you have 2 cars coming this way, right? And both of these cars get over into the emergency shoulder lane, and 2 other cars will pass in the middle of them. Literally 4 cars transiting on a 2-lane street. And there's a foot between you and the car on your right and the car that's passing you and the other car. A foot. And I've been driving for 30 some odd years, and I've never come that close to dying over and over and over and over. Ever.
Just think of the adrenaline. I mean, that was like an amusement park ride. I mean,
It was.
it's like,
Well, actually, it's funny, but the funniest part was David was asleep on one of these times where Lance was going, and it was one of these things where the entire car started screaming. Okay, and so you imagine David's just tucked away sleeping, when he wakes up to screaming, and he's seeing a car coming straight at him. And like, just like,
that's what he said. I thought I was going to wake up in heaven. Did you guys play that arcade game when you were young, like in the arcade, how they had that race car game where you were like an actual console?
I know the race car game. I kept calling it Mario Kart. Like, this is Mario Kart.
That's what I was playing when we were driving.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, they don't believe in stop signs or stoplights, but what they do believe in is speed bumps. And if you're not paying attention, I don't know how many times you guys were driving and then like boom, you hit your head, you're totally miss a speed. But I know there's one time because I was following you guys and you guys totally like ran a speed bump and just went soaring.
Airborne.
Yeah, I told someone yesterday, I said, this is something that I didn't realize when I've been to Cancun and Cabo and all of these places, but on a highway, not a freeway, but on a highway, anytime there's an intersection or another lane of traffic that's coming out, they'll lay a 1.5 foot speed bump on a 90 kilometer, which is like 65 mile an hour freeway. And so you're just driving along all peaceful, and they paint these things, but maybe every 5 to 10 years, and you're driving at night, and then all of a sudden it's like 100 feet in front of you, there's a 1.5 foot jump that's a speed bump. And it just traumatized me. Like I was been driving the last 2 days, just like looking at the, and then plus the potholes. We didn't even mention the potholes. Like they're, like,
how did we end up with like 5 flat tires?
We started calling them the pot hells.
You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like literally, I hit flat tires so many times.
I got so
losing
grateful
lands
for our U.S. infrastructure. Like coming back here once we were in Vegas and driving, and just like I don't remember seeing a pothole from Vegas to Salt Lake City, not one. And I was just like, thank you, America. That's what $35 trillion will get you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it was like the food we had was amazing. The company, like it was seriously cool. So Lance, I got some questions, and we're going to do a deep dive into this. And we're going to be discussing a little bit about the trip, but the main thing we're going to be talking about today is the Law of One, the book, The Law of One, getting into that, introducing that, to our audience. But Lance, this is your first time to Oaxaca. You've done a ton of research online. What are some of your takeaways after going to Monte Alban? And I can't remember what I'm calling the Waters of Mormon, but whatever that was so cool. What are your thoughts?
Like it was better than I had imagined, and I had imagined it to be pretty good. So, and like in everything, it's so great because I mean, my model. I mean, the first when I first started working on Book of Mormon geography, I hit a lot of dead ends. But it's crazy, like when you hit the right direction, and even when you have really high standards of like things meeting matches, like things really matching well, it's awesome when it just becomes predictive and it just gets better and better and better. And every single thing you learn, it's like, holy cow, that's actually better than I thought before. Yeah, that Hierve de Agua, that was pretty awesome. Like going to the place, and you guys didn't do it when we woke up at like 5 a.m. and went to the spot where there's the Palenque Palace that has like a throne room, and it dates to exactly the right dates of Limhi and Zenith coming back to the land of Nephi, right? It was like everything was so perfect. Like I'm just thinking in my mind, yeah, you know what? I can totally, if there's a tower on top of this hill, I could absolutely see the approaching army. There's no jungle between here and there. Like there's in almost every other site that's proposed, or huge forest like there'd be in the heartland. It's like you could absolutely see that army coming, and this would be the perfect place to actually create that palace. And it has a straight route to that Hierve de Agua, and it has a straight route to the places that would go to Zarahemla, and Monte Alban was just like, I mean, I've seen so many videos of it and read so many scholarly articles on it, dozens and dozens. And in real life, it was mind-blowing. Like, holy cow, that place is huge. That place is just like, it's awesome. It's just like a transformative experience when you get there and you're like, wow, this is spectacular.
So that Palenque Palace, I didn't go on that. You guys must have went there on Sunday.
Yeah.
What is the belief that place is? Is that the King Noah's palace or no?
King Noah's palace, yep.
And so it was better than you thought it. It's better than you thought it was, because you were a little worried, like, oh, it might be overgrown. It's not a too big tourist spot. But yeah, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, well, it was totally overgrown. And so as far as the archaeological site, like you don't see much. But as far as the location where you're at, where it's on this defensive hill overlooking a southern valley that's totally separated from the main valley by this hill So if you were looking for a defensive location where you could be in the same land, the same valley, but be safe from your enemies, like that's it. The hill totally protects it from that entire main valley of Oaxaca. So it's kind of its own little sub valley. And when we make the videos, I mean, I got some drone footage that was so awesome. It is really beautiful, right? And the defensive location is absolutely perfect.
Dude, the drone footage you got of the first day we were there in, say it, Trevor,
Teotihuacan.
See? Unbelievable. I'm so excited. And oh, by the way, you wouldn't believe this. We just announced last night that we were looking for some people to lighten the load on the editing side. Trevor, tell us what happened.
We got 3 people immediately, and all of them have extensive editing skills. One of them is in the media department at BYU, and all of them are like, I'll consecrate my time and help you guys and edit. And 2 of them have their own YouTube channels, and they're like, it's different type of stuff, but it's just editing, just like what you're doing. And so it was way cool. Just like immediately reached out.
Yeah, I am so impressed with our audience. Our audience like answers the call. Like no other subscriber base does. They answer the call immediately. And so thank you to our subscriber base.
Well, and think about the trip to Mexico. I mean, this just came on a whim after one of these, recordings of Lance's Continental model. We're talking after hours or after the recording. And I think Shane was like, we should go. And I had to remind Shane that it was when he wasn't getting his passport on time. I'm like, bro, you're the one that said we should go. You got to get that passport. In like one conversation, and then we record a little blip, we put it on, and we filled up the spots in like in no time. It was cool. And now we're getting motivated to do a big one. Well, not a big one, but a little bit bigger, right?
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. So Lance, and this is kind of like us having, like, we had a ton of people reach out and wanting to go on this trip. And it's interesting. Hey, Dave, go big on me with us on the side. So it's interesting with us on the side. It's interesting that the people that went on the trip, they're like, how did I get so lucky? Why was I the one that got picked? And as we looked at, because we didn't want to bring a large group, we were a little nervous to bring anybody because we didn't know how this thing would go. We're not trip planners. We're not like Murdoch Travel. Like, this isn't what we do. Not yet. Yeah. But some of the sites Lance hadn't even been to personally. And so this was like exploratory for all of us. And I remember as we looked at the list of names, I'm like, let's just look at like Bible names and select from there. So we saw John. We're like, yeah, let's reach out to John. John happened to be a newly minted bishop. He's the one that brought his wife. We're like, hey, there's a David. Let's grab a David. Oh, there's a guy with the middle name James. Oh, there's a guy with the first name Daniel. Let's just grab some Bible names and start adding them to our list. Oh, there's a guy with the last name Hinckley.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I bet he's related. Let's grab him. And seriously, like, I got new friends in Ryan Hinckley and David Gutierrez and John and Cherie Fielding, by the way, last name Fielding. So it was not just John, it was John Fielding. Yeah, I mean, it was just so cool. We had Daniel Clark and Ryan James Clark. Like, we had so much fun, and it ended up being about the perfect number of people for all of our Airbnbs, for our travel. Like, it literally worked out perfect. And the truth is, there was a couple of people that were supposed to come but had passport issues. And if they would have come, we would have had to make some different arrangements. We would have had to get cars. We would have had to do some things. And renting a car in Mexico is no joke. And getting in an accident in a rental car in Mexico, right, Trevor?
Nope.
It's also no bueno.
An accident and a car chase. Like, people need to, when we do our video where everyone's there and we tell about the car chase. I love, like, I'm texting my wife and my kids and I'm being like, dude, we just got hit. Now we're in a car chase. And they're like, what?
Yeah, totally.
Video doesn't go viral. Nothing that we ever do will go viral. We literally get in a car crash, and it's the only thing that we didn't film was the actual crash itself. From the talking to the guy about insurance to us leaving and him chasing us and Grand Theft Auto.
Trying to run us off the road and we're like yelling out the window, we're going to breakfast.
We called his friend on a motorcycle. It was a full-on 10 to 15-minute Grand Theft Auto chase through the back streets of Oaxaca, then onto the freeway, and him trying to see like a cop showing up, and we having to like tell the cop. It's
And your face when the cop's like, you're going to have to spend the night in jail.
Yeah, and then my text from Trevor, because we don't know, we're in the other car, we're sitting down to breakfast, and I get the text like, "Hey, dude, I need you to come over here right now. I'm close by. I might be going to jail." And I'm like, "Oh crap, okay." Yeah, and then the phrase came into my mind: "You can buy anything in this world with money." And I thought, okay, all we're gonna do, we're gonna pay these guys off. And we just came over there, started filleting $100 bills, and problem solved really quick. You'll see it. Fortunately, David the Lion Douglas literally recorded pretty much the whole thing. I'm excited for our editors to get a hold of that content and see what they can do. But it's such a memorable trip. And when we do this next one, Lance, we're trying to figure out, because I felt like the weather was like on point. Like maybe a little in the mornings, it was a little brisk, but I actually liked that. But as we look at 2025,
it was hot at Monte Alban. It wasn't hot at the Teotihuacan, but at Monte Alban, it was Dave carrying all that camera gear was dripping sweat. I was sweating.
Yeah.
While my wife is texting me being like, it's snowing again.
Yeah, exactly. So the question is Lance, when are we doing this trip in 2025? When are we going to take 30 to 40 people? And plan this thing out. And truthfully, let me tell you this, as cool as everything was, the coolest part of what happened were the relationships that we formed, the friendships that we formed with one another, because of that trip. And I can't put a dollar amount on that. And there were some lives that have been changed, some hearts that have been softened and inspired, to, like, for one guy, come back to the church. And so to me, that's like, dude, you can't put a price on that. So
one of my friends asked me, I was explaining how long we drove, because I actually haven't gotten into Google Maps, but I think between us driving to Vegas and back and then all the other stuff, I think we drove over 2,500 miles on that trip. Okay. And anyways, I was explaining that to him and he's like, "Oh my gosh, was that just horrible?" And I said, actually, the drive was like one of my favorite things the entire time, because we had 5 people in our car, and we, besides twice where we watched a comedy podcast, we just chatted like 7th grade girls the entire time about the gospel and like the wildest paths that we weaved. It was so fun, and it made it go so incredibly fast, and like we could have just kept going for weeks just talking. And
I'm gonna say, on our last day, Trevor, we had like a perfect day, and we went to breakfast. It was just a perfect breakfast. We were at this little city center, but then when we were driving, basically to our last Airbnb, the sun was setting, the mountains were there, and I had this thought. I was like, this has been the perfect day. And then you later said, this is the best day, while we're listening to Third Eye Blind. And so it was the same.
And your mic is shoddy.
Yeah, make sure you're on your right mic. But no, and for those of you worried, like, I don't want to go drive 2,500 miles, you won't have to, because in this next trip, we're going to fly. You won't have to worry about driving that road that we said was so crazy. So we learned some things. We know exactly where to fly into and what to do. And I'll tell you this, if you haven't Googled the beaches of Oaxaca, we plan to stay, I hope they have it, at some kind of resort, some kind of all-inclusive Oaxaca beach resort for the last, 3 days or so of the trip. So we'll see all of the Book of Mormon sites. We'll see all the cool things. And then the last 3 days, we'll just chill on the beaches of Oaxaca and talk about the experiences we have. So it's not only going to be kind of a Book of Mormon adventure, it'll be an actual vacation component where there'll be a little R&R and we'll have some fun. So
It's going to be amazing.
Yeah, it's the one I'm going to take. My wife's going to come. I know MacGyver and his wife April are going to come. So like we're already having people say like, hey, when are we going to do this? So Lance, looking at the calendar, knowing the timing and the weather, when do you think would be a good time for us to start looking at putting together this trip so people can start planning for next year? Maybe a husband out there will go ahead and for Christmas purchase his spot for him and his wife for a Christmas present, because I want to get this out before Christmas hits so people can plan and prepare and get signed up for and at least put a deposit down that says they're going to go.
Yeah, we'll have to try and figure out whether we want to, because we're going to do the conference in the spring, and maybe we should just shoot for next fall again. But we got to decide whether we're going to do it next spring or next fall, and we got to weave in, because it's crazy with my model. You can't just visit the whole thing at once. We've got a Heartland aspect, so we're going to have some kind of little Heartland tour at some point. I'll take some people to the Southwest because that's part of my model. Like the entire continent is my model, right? All the way from Camora to Mexico to Chiapas.
That's
And
a lot to work with.
so we're definitely going to have three main parts. We're going to have the Heartland aspect, which is all the final battles and Jordan. We're going to have the Southwest aspect, which is the Tower Sherzah, Shem. And then we're going to have the South part. But let's decide whether we do it next fall or next spring. But we'll start planning it. Maybe it'll depend on how many people sign up and what they're thinking.
Okay, I just ran numbers on the miles as we were talking. I was way over exaggerating. I think it's 1,668 miles.
Yeah, that sounds great.
That's still
far.
Still a lot.
Yeah, I mean, when I drove from my house, like when I drove from St. George all the way to Mexico City and then over to the coast and then up the coast, I think it ended up being about 3,000 miles. And that was eight straight days of driving. And that's where I learned how to drive crazy and not be scared to drive on Mexico roads.
Wow. No, it was incredible. We just want to figure out a time. Hey, and post in the comments or send us if you're interested in coming, so we kind of get an idea of how many people would be interested in this. It's extremely affordable. We figured out now exactly what the costs are of certain things. And we know where to go, where to eat, where to stay. So the only thing we don't know is our costs. We didn't do the Oaxaca beaches, but you can go on Google and we can figure that part out. But probably plan on, what do you think, Lance? Probably it'd be like a 7-day, 8-day trip that we would do. So that's how much time you're going to have to get off work.
Yeah, I think we'll do 2 days at each spot, 2, 2, and 2 in the 3 spots. So probably 7 days when you include travel.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to throw this out into the universe. You guys ready for this? Okay.
Don't say you want a hotter.
No,
I'm not going to finish that statement. Okay.
I want us to take a small crew like that, 4 to 6 people, and go to Machu Picchu.
Yeah.
Is that in Peru?
Yeah. It's Teotihuacan was really cool. Those temples were bigger than I anticipated. Monte Alban was a whole nother level on top of Teotihuacan and those pyramids. And Machu Picchu is another level on top of that, of sophistication and, the way that they built it. And like, I went right after my mission because I was in Peru. And I want to go back so bad. I want to go there with Lance and just have Lance tell me about the sublimation and the
geology of the Andes.
Do we
and have the Nevada plano?
Lance, have you been there?
Yep.
And I know that probably doesn't even fit into the model, but do we have any background as to like Was that there before? Was it built after? Do we have people that it's late? Okay.
It was still inhabited when the conquest happened. So
Yeah.
Okay.
but between the archaeology and the geology of the Andes, I mean, there's enough to talk about for so much cool stuff down there.
Well, maybe we do a little like 10-person trip. Maybe it's not necessarily Book of Mormon related. It's just interesting and fun. And we take another, 10 people and go see it again.
But Egypt and Giza, right? And Jerusalem, like that's definitely going to be one. And that is huge. When we finally get around to being able to do the Egypt and Jerusalem one, I have the coolest stuff in Egypt. Anyway,
I'm stoked for that.
Mark your calendar for
August 2nd
in 2020,
27.
Total solar eclipse, Giza, Egypt.
Yeah, we're starting to plan that now. So, if you want to jump on that one, that'll be great. Okay. That was awesome. And I'm excited for all of our people to see the footage and see the sites that we saw. Now, I'm going to ask each one of you guys, start with David the Lion here. David, was Monte Alban, and what were those pools of water? What's it called again?
Hierve de Agua.
Hierve de Agua. Do you believe that those were Book of Mormon sites? Do you believe that Hierve de Agua, Waters of Mormon, maybe? Do you believe that Monte Alban, Nephi's temple, after seeing it, feeling the energy, what do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. I hope it's conveyed well enough in the video we'll put out, but we were blown away when we got to Monte Alban. I could sense that the energy was so different compared to the other sites that we went to. And then we had this really special experience with another lady. I think she is called the Lady of Light, but we were in a group and we saw this bee that was hovering over us. And Trevor was blown away too. He was like, "That's a drone."
Like the biggest bee you've ever seen. If it was, it looked like a June.
It was exactly. It was massive. But then so that was a wild experience. And then later we went up and saw something that looked like the Tree of Life there. But then at the pools, in that mountain, I felt like so much that I'd been there before, and I couldn't explain it. And I just had such a powerful spiritual experience. It was like living inside a deja vu. Like deja vus are usually like a glimpse, but this was like a whole afternoon, and I was blown away. Those are for sure Book of Mormon locations.
Trev?
For me, the Waters of Mormon, I don't know. I definitely know for sure if anyone lived down there in that time, they'd have been there, and it would have been like a sacred site, right? And that place is incredible. And we know that, how minerals and mineral baths are naturally healing, so that place is pretty cool. The Nephi's temple thing, Monte Alban was so incredible. Like I put it in like a Machu Picchu type category, and I didn't anticipate it being as sophisticated as it was. Like that to me was there. Like we'll show it on the videos. There were all of these, structures, and inside of them they had underground rooms, and they had like patinas and mosaics in the walls underneath all these. We're talking like 5 or 6 football fields long of corridors, and you just see these mounds. We talk to the employees, and they're like, "Oh yeah, there's underground tunnels and rooms in all of these, all of them." And if I had to guess, it's millions and millions of square footage of underground, let alone all the stuff that we were seeing above ground, rooms, storage. I don't know what they're using all those places for.
Tomb.
What about when you used your phone and exactly 90 degrees east, this thing was facing? Like, how could they have even known that?
Yeah,
except for lining it up with the sun and doing all those things.
Yeah,
we went to Lance kind of took us very last to the spot where he's like, this is where I think the altar was, Nephi's temple here, the Solomon type temple behind it. And then he's explaining how this thing lines up due east. I pull out my phone and it's just like spot on. And there's this, what was it, Lance? Was there like a window or
and a solar tube? There's an actual vertical solar tube into a room that the sun only shines into, 3 days a year. So you know exactly when the spring equinoxes are and the fall and spring festivals. And there's an entire observatory building. Yeah.
It was so impressive that it made me question, like, could these guys have even built this? Like, I'm going back in the Book of Mormon times and thinking about how many people could have actually been with Nephi at that time. It was massive. The undertaking of like community to come together to pull that off is mind-boggling to me.
Like what you're saying is maybe aliens help them build it?
That,
angels.
If here's maybe a better way of looking at it for me is if that is Nephi's temple, he must have built the first temple first with the small amount of people they had, and then they built the rest of that afterwards, when there was more people. But the carbon dating pushes it back, so it couldn't have been too much longer afterwards, like 100 years maybe. I don't know. Like what is the timeline on that, Lance?
I mean, the San Jose Nagote was inhabited for sure at 600 BC and had structures started to get built right, like 580. The carbon dating is spot on, right?
Go to Martial Pond.
Martial Pond, the first site started about 560 BC. Like I'm a pretty evidence driven guy, and I like the feelings type stuff. But I mean, the evidence has to be there, and I wouldn't have Monte Alban be my Nephi if it weren't for the fact that it checks off every boxes that no other site does between the two.
How do you then? And I know that about you. So how do you reconcile if it's 550? How do you reconcile the limited people that Nephi had with them when they separated and went north and started building that?
Great question. He's got an answer here, though.
Because they couldn't build that structure with the amount of people they had.
Right. So what you see at the site, first of all, most of that has been built over a 1,000-year period. But even that initial temple, right, that we saw the LiDAR type stuff for, in my mind, this is what happened. And I think the Book of Mormon kind of suggests it, because right away, especially Jacob, when he's preaching to the people, he starts talking about my people. And you're like, wait, what do you mean your people? Like it's like you're preaching to this group, and yet there should only be like 20 of you between you and your kids and your grandkids. Why are you talking about your people and how they're starting to practice polygamy? It's like, who are you practicing polygamy with? Your cousins? Your first cousins? I mean, the daughters, grandkids of Ishmael? Like the way that it presents in the Book of Mormon doesn't make sense. It never did make sense to me until I started studying archaeology, right? Because San Jose Nagote, that site that's already in there, it dates to 1200 BC. And so in my mind, and not only that, like it has all these Israelite things. It's the first place to start having writing, to start having 2-roomed temples. There's a priesthood cult that comes in there. They call these men's houses, where they form this hierarchy and this religion. Like the archaeologists are actually saying, like, this is the foundational area of religion in all the Mexican highland. So my belief is that earlier on, like at the time of at least Solomon, and maybe even before, you had, Canaanite groups Middle Eastern groups coming into that part of Mexico and creating all these cities, right? Especially La Venta and the ones down in Tehuantepec. And so that there was basically an Israelitish settlement there. And that Nephi either got wind of it or the Lord led him to it. And so that he came, and because he had the plates and he had the sword of Laban and he had all this stuff, in the same way what happened to Mosiah later with the people of Zarahemla, they accepted him as the king. And so Nephi immediately was made king over an Israelitish people. And so now he had a big group of people at his disposal. And that's what the archaeology would show. And I think you read between the lines in the Book of Mormon, it's like, that's kind of what the Book of Mormon suggests too. That all of a sudden, by even the time of Jacob, there was like a large people that they were ruling over.
That makes sense. So when Nephi showed up there, and in my mind, I always thought, oh, Nephi showed up there. There was nobody there. There was nothing there. And I don't know why I thought that growing up. And until I talked to Lance, I'm like, oh, why would I think that? Clearly, there was travel going on. And so to see that dating take place, I'm like, okay. That makes sense. There were people there. Nephi shows up. He's got the brass plates, the sword of Laban. They're just like, who is this guy? He's large in stature. So, I think they just kind of said, okay, we want you to be our king. And they moved more. It looks like Oaxaca was inland. Now, Lance, explain why they would have gone to Oaxaca. You've explained it to me. I want people to understand why they would have left from the coast to come to Oaxaca.
Yeah, and this is another super great evidence for the Mexican Highland model, and something that really struck me when I was there. Right, if you got these other models where their land of Nephi is in a jungle or even in the Southwest, your crops in the Middle East aren't going to grow there. So it's like they would have hit the coast and been like, "Yeah, our crops aren't going to grow here. This is way too wet, way too humid. We got to find a drier place." And if you're looking for a dry place, you go to the Mexican Highland, especially the Balsas Basin, like the land of Zarahemla. Like that climate is totally Mediterranean. It is very, very dry in the dry season. So all of their barleys, their wheats, their figs, their olives, all of their plants that they brought from the old world would grow. And I suspect that when they got to the New World, like, remember in my other video, I show that overwhelming evidence of those statues in Teotihuacan that match with the Egyptian and the Assyrian motifs. So I think we had quite a few little groups coming over, which the Book of Mormon also suggests with the Amalekites, right? The Amalekites is a biblical term. So it's like, why do we have Amalekites in the Book of Mormon? Like, those are Bible people. And not only that, they're Bible people that predated the time of Solomon. Like they date from the time of Moses, which is why I think that because the Amalekites are in the Book of Mormon, I think that they were part of the Phoenician groups that were coming over as early as 1200 BC and definitely at the time of Solomon, and that they were existing colonies. And so when the Nephites got there, like they found Middle Eastern colonies here and there because it was a period of globalized empire, before it fell again. But anyway, yeah, they went to Oaxaca and the Mexican Highland because the climate let their plants grow.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. And then when you see it, you're like, okay. So Lance, now that I know your model already suggests that Monte Alban is Nephi's temple. Are you more convinced now that you've actually touched down there?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, the date and just all of those check boxes, between it being the only temple that dates to that time that's east facing, 2-room, 2 columns, but finding about all the tombs and all the tunnels, and then seeing how much it feels like a Temple Mount, like seriously like a Jerusalem Temple Mount, like rivaling Jerusalem's Temple Mount, and how the religion persisted, and then Mitla especially, because the religious center moved from Monte Alban to Mitla to the conquest. It was like, wow, that is impressive. Anyway,
and I could feel, like, I'm more of a feel guy. I could feel at Monte Alban, like this is a sacred, holy site. Like there was lots of things going on there. There was lots of education happening there. There was lots of fun and families. There's fields on top of this thing. Like I could see them, playing tag or whatever they did back in those days. At the same time, I could see people sitting on the steps and being taught. Like really cool place. Okay. And stay tuned for the videos that are going to come out, where you'll be able to see exactly what we were doing when we were out there. Okay. Now let's transition. Lance, Law of One. For those of you who don't know what the Law of One is, Lance is here to help guide us and instruct us as to what is the Law of One. Where does this book come from? What kind of work is it? You've heard Lance talk a lot about it in his videos as he says, well, the Law of One says this, or the Colburn says that. We're going to try to cover these, I call them apocryphal works, other writings, and how with using our standard works, we can better understand these writings, these books, these other maybe revelations. And so with that, and I will tell you this, my wife absolutely loves The Law of One. It's one of her favorite books. It has helped her love more. It has helped her understand when Jesus says, if you are not one, you are not mine. It's helped her understand becoming one in our relationship with each other. So with that, Lance, introduce our audience to the Law of One. I'd love to understand kind of how you came upon it and what your thoughts are and its origin, and then maybe get into some of its teachings.
Yeah, and I think this came up because at Monte Alban, there was quite a few New Age people like doing their yoga and meditating, um, and so the Law of One is a foundational New Age text, and I almost have to like take off my like when it comes to Book of Mormon archaeology, I have a very scientific because my background is as a scientist, like I have very high scientific standards, but I have this other part of me that just loves speculative. Um, New Age type stuff. And the reason why I like Law of One with, the other texts that are on my website, when I gathered in one site, I've got OASP, the Law of One, the Colburn. And I think out of all of the texts, and I read hundreds, hundreds and hundreds of channeled and esoteric texts when I got off my mission, right? Just anything that kind of talked about the old world or the life after death. And I think why the Law of One and OASP in particular resonated with me is even though they're speculative and who knows where they come from, they answer so many questions and they give a really good pathway within even they match pretty well with a lot of Mormon doctrine, but in a way that like you kind of have to change the way you think to universalize your faith, right? And that maybe is a concept a lot of people don't know about, but there's a guy named Fowler, who came up with Fowler's stages of faith. And if you haven't heard of that, you should check it out, right? It's this idea that we all kind of progress through these different stages of faith, and they somewhat match really what the scriptures teach about Israel and the gospel, like evolving through these stages of faith. And they tend to be like early in your faith journey, people tend to be very literal, right? Like everything is absolutely literal and kind of convoluted, and you don't really understand everything, but you are sure that every word in the scriptures is exactly literal. You know what I mean? So but that literal phase breaks down the more you delve into scripture, right? So the more that you start like seeing that the scriptures are teaching things that absolutely can't be literal, right? They're telling about, they're making a microcosm and a macrocosm and making everything into a metaphor where you're like, oh, okay, well, if that's talking about, a broken heart, that can't be a literal broken heart. If that's talking about a flood, but then in another place it tells about the baptism of Israel through the Red Sea. Well, that's not a literal baptism. Anyway, the more, and then when you read Ecclesiastes and some of the Songs of Solomon, you're like, whoa, wait, is this God himself speaking? I mean, Ecclesiastes is almost like an anti-God book in some ways, except for that one verse. Like the whole thing is like, this is all meaningless. Everything in the world is meaning. The more you get into the scriptures, you more kind of have to be like, oh, this is totally changing the way that I see these prophetic words. You know what I mean? And you start to universalize the text, which means now instead of everything being literal and pointed just toward me and kind of like in this egocentric, like self-centered type of religion, everything has to start being seen through a lens of like, well, if I apply the same logic to like a Muslim or to a Taoist or to a Hindu, is it still true? How can God be the God of Israel, but also be the God of the whole world? How does he fit in with these other religions? How does this fit in with scientific information? How does this fit in with, anyways, so that's the idea of universalization. And it's an important stage. Like there's like 5 stages in Fowler's stages of faith. And I feel like a lot of people who leave the church, basically they get stuck in one of the stages and they're not able to progress through to another one of the stages within Mormonism, right? Because you're always going to be progressing. Like as you get older and learn more, your consciousness will raise and you will progress. But if you can't fit Mormonism within your progressing worldview, suddenly you can't stay there, right? That is what the shelf is. It's like instead of you readapting the way that you see Mormonism, because there is no one Mormonism. Like everybody, I see Mormonism. My Mormonism is completely different than mine was when I was 16, or from my 16-year-old son, or from my 80-year-old grandparent. Everyone has a different version of their religion, whatever religion it is, right? And the idea is we all want to be able to walk up through those stages together. And I think that Mormonism gives a better system to do that than almost any religion, like especially in the temple. Like how much more could you have like an idea that there are these different stages and you have to walk through the stages and everyone goes through them all before you come to the veil into the celestial kingdom. And
by the way, speaking of those stages, speaking of the temple, I went yesterday and I learned something new. Again, I learned something new. when it talks about living the law of consecration, we are in the stage of living in a terrestrial state. So we are in a telestial state right now. So we're only accepting that we will live the law of consecration once we level up to a terrestrial state. So we're not there yet. That's why we're not expected to live it, because we're still living in a telestial state.
Right. And we should be there, because the whole idea, right, is that we progress as far as we can individually.
Right.
But the church is only going to progress as it does. You
Right,
know,
right.
and it's still like in that boundary between telestial and terrestrial. And it's
Well,
simply
and you're spot on. And I feel like just by us saying, hey, we need an editor, and we have these people that say, hey, I'm willing to consecrate my time, that is living. So these people that are willing to edit and consecrate their time are choosing for themselves to live in a terrestrial state, even though this is a telestial world we're in. And so it's really, you're exactly right, Lance.
Yeah. And like, so in the millennium, the world will become a terrestrial state, and the terrestrial kingdom gets to interact with heavenly beings. Like Christ will be able to come and go from heaven when the world is a terrestrial. And when church reaches that part, and when you reach that point, you get to interact with heaven. You start having dreams and visions, and then the world will at one point be celestial. But the big point here is that there are these stages, and they all lead from like this really low telestial sectarian, I have my belief and it's the most true, the only truth, and everyone else is false. And I don't even care about everyone else's beliefs. I'm not even going to think about them. It's just my version it's my way or the highway. And then we progress through all these states until we become one, until we literally mind meld with everybody else, and all of our beliefs and all of our minds and hearts are absolutely one, right, in the celestial kingdom. So, and my point is that these channeled texts, whether it be OASP or the Law of One, I mean, they do an amazing job of helping you, like, as long as you hold tight to the scriptures, the foundational scriptures, Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, and then you kind of just let these things challenge your beliefs. They force you to then search our scriptures and be like, oh, wow, okay, I have to look at that differently. And they did. There's just this expansion of your mind and consciousness that I wish that everybody would just kind of delve into these things a little bit, even though I don't believe everything in them, but let them challenge your beliefs, because they will change you.
When you say channeled work, I get so many people are like, channeled, oh no, like that's not good. And we don't realize that the first 5 books of Moses were essentially channeled.
Yeah, Doctrine and Covenants.
The Doctrine and Covenants is a channeled work. We're just using a different vernacular. What would be another name that we would use in our LDS vernacular? Revelation?
Revelatory. Yeah, a revelatory text.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can call it a channeled work, or you could call it a revelatory text. We're saying the same thing using a different word. For us members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we use the term revelation. For the rest of the world, they use the word channeled. It means the same thing. So don't freak out when Lance says this is a channeled text. He's just using a term that is more widely used among the people of this world.
Hey, what was the entire Doctrine and Covenants?
Yeah, exactly what we just said. Yeah, that is a channeled or revelatory work.
And from what we understand from the Book of Abraham as well, now that we know that it wasn't a direct translation, or at least 95% of the people don't believe, including the church, that it was a direct translation. That was something that inspired Joseph to receive a channeled or revelatory book that's canonized for us. So it's just it's like a scary word, because it's like New Age, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and we should always take these other texts with a grain of salt, for sure, and there's parts of them that are great for sure. But
a lot of the channel stuff, and I think you'd agree with this, a lot of the channel stuff that I've read is like there's tons of truth in it, and then there's stuff, and it depends on the book too. You might get something that's like 90% amazing, and then there's some stuff in there being like, no, I'm not down with that, right? There's some stuff that's like 50-50, but to me, if I find something and I find 10% just gems, truth that's inside of that, and it's 90% fluff, right, and I don't agree with any of it, I've got the intellectual capacity to take that, set it aside, and to hold on to the good piece of it. And I love it for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that very concept. So this is, we'll just go through a couple of the concepts in Law of One that I love because of what they're saying. And one of them is what we just said. Like it specifically says that when these higher groups, and it goes so specific about how higher groups work and how as you get higher in the groups, like they become more of these group consciousnesses. They call them social memory complexes, but they basically have joined, they can all see each other's thoughts and minds. And it says that even in this world, if you can join a group, then at least in your sleep, like you can kind of join consciousnesses. So a lot of times when we like have something revealed to us in the spirit, it might be that we're just connected to everyone else in the church. You know what I mean?
So I got to tell you something, going back to the trip, and not to digress, but I don't know if you guys heard this story, but I ended up staying in the same like little apartment or condo with David Gutierrez on the trip. And I said, hey, you know, we're going to travel tonight. He's like, what? I said, yeah, and we're in a new land. You and I are sleeping you're in this room, I'm in this room, but just know we're going to go travel tonight. We'll probably do some missionary work. He's like, what are you talking about? I said, just watch, like literally, you and I are going to go share the gospel tonight. We're going to go exploring tonight. So go ahead, go to bed. And when you wake up in the morning, let me know what happened. He wakes up in the morning. He's like big eyes. He's like, dude, I don't know what's going on, but I literally dreamed you and I were doing missionary work here in this area, sharing the gospel. It was incredible. And yeah, so to go along with what Lance is talking about, that is a real thing, 100%. And I understand that I needed to be in Mexico, not just for my waking time, but also for my sleeping time.
You know that second night in Oaxaca, I dreamed that me and you went and visited a site.
No way.
Hold on.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
anyways, it was fun traveling.
You know, and I can't even count how many of my ideas come from dreams. And I just firmly believe, like, and this is a law of one concept, that like as you elevate your own consciousness, which all of the gospel principles are trying to get us to do that, like you connect with people and you connect with the group that you choose. And so that then you can work with the group in your sleep. Like you can get so much information and progress so much faster if you're part of that group, if you can truly meld your heart and mind, which is what it's all about, to be in tune with that spirit, with that vibration.
Which, imagine you can do that with your own spouse. Imagine if you and your spouse are, hey, it's bedtime. Oh, and I call it the 11:11 portal. I'm like, I got to be to sleep in bed by 10:33 so I can catch the bus at 11:11. So my wife and I try to catch the bus and see what we can go learn together. So it's an interesting idea anyways.
Yeah. Another concept that it says that I think is really interesting is the source that revelation comes from, right? And it has this thing where it basically says that any channel, which is kind of why they call it channeling, right? So any revelatory text, like the person who's receiving revelation, if their purity will dictate the purity of the work, right? So if you are, in fact, the way the law of one works is they had these three of them, you know, and the youngest one was this lady named Carla Rupert, you know, and she was only like 18 years old. And she's using in this text like crazy words, like words that an 18-year-old girl would never know, like superluminal velocities, right? And like, anyway, things that I didn't even know what they were. And I'm a full-on scientist, you know, and I'm having to read like, oh, that's close to this. It's like asymptotic travel close to the speed of light. Anyway, so she gets picked as a channel because they try the other dudes, and the other dudes are like, one of them's a professor. He's brilliant. And you just naturally think, well, he should be the best channel. And if it's fake, he's the one who should be talking because he would know all this stuff, but she wouldn't know squat. But they pick her because she doesn't know anything and she's able to channel the information without putting her own spin and opinions into it.
She has no blocks.
Right. And that like rings so true to me that when it comes to revelation, like a true prophet is somebody who is able to connect and grab stuff without diluting it or polluting it. But that so many of these works, like the Law of One, like it even says in there, like that you guys sometimes pollute these works. Like I can't remember how it phrases it.
Because of bias, right?
Exactly.
Our bias can pollute those works.
Right. And so someone like Joseph Smith, like he is a very pure channel, just getting amazing stuff from very high levels. Whereas it's talking about how it's like there's all these different levels. Oh, Aspie goes into detail on this too. And a lot of times you're just reaching up like one level and you're just learning things from spirits who are just a little bit smarter than you. And it's like, well, why would you want to take advice from that? Like, you need to find prophets who are able to connect to very high beings, right? If not people from the celestial kingdom itself, because once you get to the celestial kingdom, everybody has one heart and mind. And so whatever they say is going to be the same. It doesn't matter who appears to you. They can come in the name of Jesus Christ and say, I am Jesus Christ, because they are literally one, right? But just like it says, I, the Father, and the Spirit, we are one.
That's a very deep thought if you picked up on what he just said right there.
Yeah. I mean, and a lot of times, like in the lower beings, and especially in the telestial world, like it's all about personality cults. Everybody has this ego and they're all vying for position and for like fame and favor. And it's all about my name. And even when it comes to like who's appearing to us, you know, it's some are Elijah and some are Elias and some are.
Isn't that interesting? So once you get to the celestial realm, the ego goes away.
Yeah. Yeah. And it doesn't matter who appears to you. Like people are like, well, was it really Jesus or was it someone else? It's like, well, if they're on the same level, it doesn't matter who it was because they are all one. And they might come in the name of a certain title. But people in the celestial kingdom, they are one. They will give you the same message because their minds and hearts are absolutely connected.
Yeah. See how we did that? See how we did that right there? We said connected at the same time.
So we're on our way.
Like throwing a soda because they just jinx.
That's right. I do that so much with my wife. I mean, anyone who has a great marriage, you know, has that same thing where it's like you're always finishing each other's sandwiches, you know, or whatever.
I like that.
But
not sentences, sandwiches.
Right. I've got too many girls in my family. So anyway, the concept that the Law of One gives is it calls it a social memory complex. That as you get into these higher levels, like all the beings meld into a social memory complex. And so you want to connect with these way higher levels. But anyway, that's a really cool concept, I think.
Lance, how is a way we can detect maybe a false prophet is somebody that wants the glory and the fame for themselves, and they're putting themselves kind of on a pedestal. And is it kind of a hard, even there are people that probably are getting information and then their ego steps in and that's maybe why they fall. Could that potentially be what happened to, say, like King David? He let his ego get in and then he fell and then he spent the rest of his days writing things like Psalms.
Yeah. You know, and so both Oaspi and the Law of One they just have so much powerful information in there. They have this concept, and the Law of One really hits home on this, that there is a system in place, somewhat like the Prime Directive in Star Trek. If anyone has watched Star Trek enough and knows
what is, I don't know Star Trek. I know this sign. That's about the extent of my Star Trek. But for us that don't know what the Prime Directive is, didn't you say you had like a video on this or no?
I do. Do we want to show a little bit of it?
Yeah, if you can pull it up, just because I never watched Star Trek. However, I have seen the Star Trek movies with Chris Pine, and I did find those really good, but I never watched the old school Star Treks.
I'm in the same boat. I do know what the Prime Directive is, but Star Trek was just too nerdy for me. But I loved the J.J. Abrams Star Wars, which is the Chris Pine. Like, that was rad.
Yeah, you know, and we could get it from that one because it that first scene where they like stop the volcano and save the society, but then they get censured when they get back to home base because they broke the Prime Directive, which is they cannot interfere with the self-determination of lower races, right? But they're like, well, we should save them, but the Star Trek's like, no, we don't interfere with these lower orders, right? And they can only interfere once that society like achieves once they can achieve warp speed in their technology, then they can travel between galaxies and affect their own self-determination. But until then, they are not to be touched. And the Law of One goes into like this crazy detail that there are all these different dimensions of beings and that there are strict rules among the higher dimensions. And it's called the Zoo hypothesis. There's Wikipedia articles on this. Because there are similar rules in place with us, right? In Brazil, there are uncontacted primitive groups that still live like they did thousands of years ago. And there are rules that you cannot get in and affect the self-determination of these uncontacted native tribes, right? And
that's above, so below. Okay,
exactly. And because it's logical. It's totally logical, whether it be in Star Trek or whether it be in Brazilian law, Like, this is a logical thing that you should not be toying with or affecting the self-determination of far lower beings. So anyway, let's watch this for 1 second and just listen to the debate, and then realize this exact same debate is carried into the law of one, and it has amazing applications to the gospel.
So while Lance is pulling that up, I got a question, Trevor. Do you think that much of this, like whether it's Star Trek or Star Wars or these like movies, that like I literally last night was watching, don't judge me, Deadpool Wolverine, because they're talking about timelines and compressing them and doing all these things. So somebody told me, hey, you need to watch this. And be careful. There's language in there. Like my wife's like, why are you watching this? I'm like, I'm trying to watch it because I want to understand timelines and I don't care about these other jokes. But Trevor, do you think that these movies are trying to maybe teach us something?
Yeah, well, I think they for sure are trying to teach us, and it's like being weaved into like the zeitgeist, like preparing society, right? And I don't know if that's intentional. I don't know if that's like collective conscious that's like getting downloaded to these writers. But, I mean, we've seen it happen all the way back to like the Wizard of Oz, from the time that we've got motion pictures, there's just like this weaving in of this lower, this deeper esoteric message. And I don't know where it comes from. I don't know how much of it is deliberate. I don't know if there's, writers that are pulling off into like a cigar filled room being like, okay, next we have to cover the timeline merge because in 2030, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know what's happening, but something's happening.
Yeah. So, and I feel like there's a code in almost everything, and it's trying to figure out the code. Imagine we're in this incredible game that we're playing right now, and this game is called Exaltation, and you've got to see through the code, which means sometimes you might have to watch a rated R movie. And I wish that I still had Clean Flicks that I could go to so I could get rid of the stuff that doesn't matter. But you got to be willing to, if you want to understand the code, you might have to be willing to follow the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law in order to figure things out. So please don't judge me that I watched a rated R movie.
All right, we're gonna watch this. We've all watched a rated R movie, don't all the people out. Anyway, okay, let's watch this really quick. This is not rated R. Here we go.
It is no longer a matter of how wrong Beta was, or why he did it. The dilemma exists. We have to discuss the options, and please talk freely.
There are no options. The Prime Directive is not a matter of degrees. It is an absolute.
Can you slow it down?
I have a problem with that kind of rigidity. It seems callous.
Oh yeah.
He's on triple X speed here. And
Sorry,
for
I
us
listened
slow
to-
guys,
Listen to everything into it.
It's not a matter
he
of
didn't even know it was
degrees.
fast.
Seriously,
absolute.
I didn't.
I have a problem with that kind of rigidity. It seems callous and even a little cowardly.
Doctor, I'm sure that is not what the lieutenant meant, but in a situation like this, we have to be cautious. What we do today may profoundly affect the future. If we could see every possible outcome,
we'd be gods, which we're not. If there is a cosmic plan, is it not the height of hubris to think that we can or should interfere?
Pause it real quick. Pause it real
Are
quick.
fated to die?
I think
I have been saying this. God is all knowing, but he doesn't know everything. But what does that mean? It means he can see all the possible outcomes. But what makes it interesting, at least this is what I've heard from other scholarly people, what makes it interesting is we have our agency. So even though they can see all the potential outcomes, they don't know which of those outcomes we're going to choose. And they just dropped that doctrinal bomb probably in 1977 on Star Trek.
Yeah, and I mean this is huge because the law of one goes into all this detail, like that the majority of prayers that are from the telestial realm are answered by the terrestrial realm, right? And terrestrial prayers are answered by the celestial realm. So we're always praying to God, and we're always hoping that the God Almighty is going to answer us. But anyone who's been alive enough to see their siblings and their friends who thought for sure that God was talking to them, and maybe was getting information that like ended up being prophetic or predictive, but then in the end ended up being wrong. like realizes, I'm not sure who's always answering our prayers, but maybe it isn't always the omniscient God of the universe.
Well,
Maybe it's lower beings.
let me remind you that in the temple, when Adam begins to pray, you know who answers his prayer? Who comes to him first?
Yeah.
I think
And
his name's Satan.
Yeah. And who is it who answers it after he is able to recognize Satan and say, get hence, I understand you are not a good being. You don't have my good things a chance. Who answers him? A chain of command.
A chain of command.
A commander James higher and then tells the lower beings, and the law of one gets this exact detail. Same with the WASP. WASP calls it a line of light, but it has to be passed down through the dimensions, right? And so who usually answers our prayers? It's like probably our ancestors. The majority of them are probably being answered by our ancestors. And I had this same experience where it's like I was praying and I'd get an answer and it's like, no, that's just a little bit more than what I know. That's not enough. I need somebody who knows more. And I almost felt like it's like I was getting passed off to higher beings, because then it started getting really original information. And OASP is this exact same idea. The guy talks about the same thing, how it's like he wasn't getting the light he needed to. And so it's like he kept going to higher and higher levels because he didn't believe what was being taught. He's like, this isn't good enough.
Real quick shout out to Mike Rigby for talking to us about Holy Ghostesses and serving in the office of the Holy Ghost, because that sounds pretty similar to that.
Yeah, it's like these are titles. We all know the Holy Ghost is the ruler of the lower realm, right? That Gentiles only can reach the Holy Ghost. But it says then Israel, people who are part of the terrestrial realm can actually be visited by Christ, right? And in the Book of Mormon, Christ is like I never visited the Gentiles. I only visit the house of Israel, right? And then it's the Father only visits even like the terrestrial people. Anyway, it's the same concept.
And that is the case in the temple. Like when Adam and Eve are in a terrestrial realm, they get visited by Elohim and Jehovah. But as soon as they go to a telestial realm, no longer does Elohim and Jehovah visit them. They are visited through a chain of command. Peter, James, and John then comes to them. So it is taught in the temple. Okay, go back to that Star Trek. You'll have to rewind a little bit, but I thought that was money, how they talked about that.
Let's do it. Let's play it a little bit. And then people can think in their mind, like just picture it, like our ancestors having this exact same discussion, and the church when they're trying to answer prayers, like, well, how much can we interfere in this person's life who's asking for this thing in their prayers?
So what are you saying? That the Dremons are fated to die?
I think that's an option that we should be considering.
Considered, and rejected.
If there is a cosmic plan, are we not a part of it? Our presence at this place, at this moment in time, could be a part of that fate.
Right, and it could be part of that plan that we interfere.
Well, that eliminates the possibility of fate.
But, Commander, the Dremons are not a subject for philosophical debate. They are a people.
So we make an exception in the deaths of millions.
Yes.
And is it the same situation if it's an epidemic and not a geological calamity?
Absolutely.
What about a war? If generations of conflict is killing millions, do we interfere? Oh, well, now we're all a little less secure in our moral certitude. And what if it's not just killings? If an oppressive government is enslaving millions? See, the prime directive has many different functions, not the least of which is to protect us, to prevent us from allowing our emotions to overwhelm our judgment.
My emotions are involved.
Let's stop there for now. So because this is kind of cool too. So the Law of One goes into more detail. It talks about all these different groups that are involved in Earth, right? And how it tells about the processes. It has this thing called the call. And there's like this mathematic formula, essentially, that makes it so that a certain number of people have to call with a certain amount of like fortitude before what it calls as quarantine can be dropped, right? So in order for higher groups to be able to interfere in lower groups, they have to be called. And the call has to have a certain strength. And it obeys the law of squares, like the same law that the gravitational constants, gravitational equations and electromagnetic equations are based on. So anyway, it's really wild. It weaves science in a crazy way that is so fascinating. But the idea that it's like, yeah, you have to be able to call, and then even then they're going to have to debate, like, do they interfere? And the big thing where it says it's to protect us. So it says that once they do interfere, they become karmically involved with the groups that they interfere with.
Yeah.
Now this is like a wild idea that you can interweave with the gospel. because we're all about being a covenant people. We covenant with God. And what is that covenant? Like, it is essentially that karmic involvement, right? They understand, these really high beings understand, like, okay, if you want to call and I'm going to answer you, we can do that. But you have to make a covenant with me, because we are now karmically involved in a way that we cannot escape. Like, even these raw people, they said that they have to continue to come and try and fix the karmic distortions that they cause in Earth's timeline. So they're having to continually come back to Earth to try and fix the problems. And they said that when they were a younger race, they came in their naivety. They thought, oh, well, we can help, we can do this. And they were naive. And now they're having to fix all these problems that now, as they're more advanced and they see that the problems they caused, they have to fix them.
Hey, Lance, have you heard this phrase when we break down Israel is Isis, Ra, God Ra, Elohim? Have you heard much about this? But there's that Ra inside of Israel.
Yeah, I've looked that up so many times. Every single article you ever find on it is just going to say, that's coincidence, that's coincidence, that's coincidence. But I tell you, it's a crazy coincidence. I keep going back to it and being like, what are the chances? Is this Israel? I don't know. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe it's not.
Well, when these beings become karmically involved, that makes a ton of sense. And then they start participating. And explain what, for a lot of people, maybe they've never even heard of the word karma. When you say karmically involved, this is, again, outside of our traditional vernacular as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Explain what you mean by karmically involved.
Like, I really do believe in the concept of karma, which is, as you sow, so shall you reap, right? It's a spiritual principle.
That's doctrinal, yes.
Yeah. And so there is a law of physics that if you drop something, gravity is going to affect it, right? As you do things, you're going to reap the actions. But I like this idea that the more advanced you become, the more aware you become of your actions. And the more you realize that if you create a negative reaction, it affects you, right? And the law of one, the reason why the law of one is called the law of one is because its very premise is that eventually all advanced beings have to realize that we are all one. Like, we're all different faces of the same consciousness.
Just so you know, I didn't want to go to Mexico. Like, one of my concerns about going to Mexico is becoming karmically involved. So if you watched how I tried to interact out there, I'm trying to interact to make sure that I don't create any negative karma out there with anybody, because I'm trying to navigate that place without becoming karmically involved.
Yeah. I mean, sensitive people, you feel it, right? Like, if you get in a fight with somebody, there is an inner turmoil until you smooth that over, especially the more one with somebody you are, right? Like your wife and she's mad at you and you can feel it inside. Like that is karma. It's like once you become connected to a certain degree, that's like, oh, well, any disharmony I create in them, I create in myself. I feel it in myself. And so I've got to fix it in them to fix it in me.
And this is what my wife has said to me, Shane, I'm you and you're me. I would never do this to myself. And when you start thinking that way, whether it's your spouse, whether it's your podcast hosts, whether it's your friends, when you start thinking that, hey, you're me and I'm you, so why would I ever treat you that way? And maybe what Jesus was saying when he's like, love your neighbor, he's saying, don't create this negative karma, because you're going to have to, as you sow, so shall you reap. And I take that to heart in every interaction that I have with every person, whether it's Ruby at the gas station or the TSA agent as I'm traveling. I'm really aware of this concept and trying to make sure that I don't create any negative karmic ripples. That I've already done plenty of those, right? I'm worried about the stuff that I've done previous in my life, and I'm trying to create as much good karma to counterbalance the negative karma that I created in my life. I'm hoping that prison was one of those things that I did that really, really ramped that up while I was in there to help those my friends that were in prison with me. But this is a really interesting concept. And it sounds like the law of one really dives deep into this.
Yeah. I mean, it has this weirdest language. You have to get through a serious language barrier to even get into it. But even its concept of God builds on the same idea, right? Because its concept of God, it calls it infinite intelligence, right? So in Mormonism, we get bagged on by all the other churches because our concept of God is really kind of wild. We have all these multiple gods. We can become gods, and gods are constantly moving up as we come and replace them, right? It's like these crazy ideas, and they're new age ideas, essentially. And then you got D&C, 132, where it's like talking about the God of all other gods and the council of gods. So this idea in us that we have gods going all the way up this ladder until we reach some kind of a hierarchy that D&C 84 kind of talks about, a permeating spirit that is in all things, through all things, that's in the sun and the light of the sun and the power by which it was made, right? Like that is like this infinite intelligence that the Law of One, I think, talks about. And in that respect, we're actually a part of God, almost like our body is composed of millions of individual cells that have a type of consciousness in and of themselves, but might not realize that they're actually just part of a greater being. The highest God is basically an infinite intelligence that encompasses all sentient life in the universe. Like we're a part of that. We're a part of God. So when Christ comes to the Nephites and he's constantly over and over repeating, and the Father and the Spirit and the Son are one God. We are one God. Over and over, he's saying we are one. You know, and in his intercessory prayer, Christ saying that these may be one with me as I am one with thee, you know, that they might be fruit on the vine as I am one with it. It's all pushing toward this same idea. We are all one. We're all one.
What do people get worried when they talk about becoming one because they feel like they're going to lose their individuality? Explain so people can comprehend that you still have your individuality. It's just like you're still you and your wife's still her, but you're one. This is a concept that for people that are in the ego have a hard time letting go of because they don't want to, they feel like they're losing who they are somehow.
Yeah. And the Law of One, and like I say, all this is speculation. This is the detail it gives. It gives us like progression. And it says that this telestial realm tends to last about like 75,000 years. They were kind of stuck in this cycle. But the next terrestrial realm, it says lasts like something like 1.2 million years. And then the next realm, I don't even think it gives a date on that. So it's like by the time you have been individualistic for 1.2 million years, like you're going to start melding more and more with other people, but it's not going to be faster than you want to. Like right now, become one as fast as you can. But don't worry too much if way down the line, like somehow did you lose your individuality when you got married? I mean, would you say I'm less of an individual? I think that it'll be no different once you've like started to meld almost entirely with groups where you can see each other's thoughts 100%. And then down the line, maybe where you start to even think similar thoughts. It's like, well, you know, I've been individualistic for millions of years. I'm kind of ready to do whatever's next in the stage of progression. And who knows what that is. It's kind of weird. That's just speculation, but who knows?
Cool. Okay. So any other, as we kind of wrap up here, I've skimmed through because my wife reads the Law of One. And I don't know why this was, but I had the book, and as I was getting ready to read it, the Spirit said, you're not ready, but your wife is. And I'm like, what? I'm not ready? Man, I'm an avid reader. I'm not ready, but I trusted the Spirit, and so I gave the book to my wife, and she's basically taught me out of the Law of One. And recently, I felt like, okay, now I'm at a place where I'm now ready to read the Law of One. But even in talking to her, some of the words, like it's a hard text to read. So, what advice do you have for people? And there's multiple series of the book. If you were giving advice to somebody that wanted to jump in and start reading or listening to the Law of One, where would you tell them to start? How would you tell them to manage the language barrier that's in there? And how would you advise, especially members of our church, to kind of study it? And how would you go about it if you were going to make this a part of your study? And how did you go about it?
You know, I think that there's very few people who are going to get into this book. And I have kind of like an insatiable appetite for anything that has like a scientific cosmology in it. And like it has some pretty crazy science in it that I love, you know? So if you're going to try and study it, first of all, I would just like go to my website, you know, gatheredin.one, look up my text section and look at I've done kind of a blurb on it. And I give some of the language in there and how it translates. right? Like mind, spirit, body complex is just an individual teach, learn, cheat, teach. Why it gives everything in dualities.
David, Trevor, could you pull up his site real quick just so people know again how to get there? And we can kind of click through your site, Lance, and you can kind of show, because honestly, it's your site that literally I read To Go No More Out. I suggest everybody go to Lance's site, gatheredin.one, and he's done a masterful job at compiling this information so you can understand, and he's got all these different references that you can go to between all the different scriptures as you're studying this stuff. So I highly recommend you go to Lance's site. Lance, you don't even make money on this, right? Like it's not like I'm trying to pump your site up like, oh, go there, because Lance, like, he does this because, one, I think he felt obviously prompted, like he needed to do it. But two, I feel like he genuinely wants to help people increase or elevate their learning and vibration. So here's his site right here. Lance, kind of walk us through, if I'm on your site. Hey, it looks like you've updated it too. It looks like you've got some things going on here. Have you been working on this?
Yeah, there's a couple little things. Hit that text, see right about after death, and then text. Click that and then scroll down. And you'll see that there's one of them called, if people haven't read the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus Christ, man, start there. But go up an LDS, go up a little bit right there on the left, an LDS perspective on the Law of One material. And I say in there, like, I have a couple of these texts where I'm like, I'm not sure I would suggest that a lot of people delve into this. Like, if it calls you, read it and tread carefully. Like, pray and follow that spirit. One thing that the Law of One makes really clear is that when you do get into esoteric knowledge, where that you are connected kind of with higher beings and they're going to come teach you, there's part of this prime directive, part of this higher law says that if a group from these, it calls a service to self or service to other side, right? The good versus the bad, the inward facing versus the outward facing higher beings. If you have one group come, the other group will always come too. And this is almost like a curse. It's the same with Joseph Smith, how he had the devil come when Christ came. Like, anytime you have a good higher being experience, you are going to have an evil group come 100%. And try and counteract it. Like, that's part of the law written in the cosmos.
Lance, have you noticed, I know for me, I know Joseph Smith had the negative, then the positive. But for me, I've noticed I have the positive. Maybe I'm just a backwards human. I have a positive, and then the negative follows after that.
That's more common. And it says it's almost like a beacon of light, like that the dark side can see. When a light appears and flashes, it suddenly sees, and it says it comes to try to extinguish that light. Like, it absolutely sees any kind of positive outward-facing energy that happens in the earth, and it will come and try and counteract it. And so you need to have groups to be able to protect you from those bad influences if you're ever hope to create a good influences that persists. Because if you're solo and you are that light, like, there are more powerful beings than you. You'll get conquered. There's no way, unless you are like absolutely calling on, and you have some higher angels that can help you. Like, all this esoteric stuff, it's wild, and it's just going to sound crazy and kooky to people who aren't spiritually inclined. But once you get up to that kind of spiritual realm where you exist in the spiritual realm quite a bit, and you're having dreams and you're having visions and stuff like that, this stuff's real, and totally. There will be that bad influence to come and try and bring you down.
Totally. Okay. So go back to his site there. So if somebody wants to get into the Law of One, they should read this article that you have, which is what I'm going to do. I'm gonna start my own study. I see you quote D&C 121 there. I love that it says in D&C 121, whether there be one God or many gods, they shall be known. It's talking about densities. This my wife's always talking about, oh yeah, this density, and I'm going, like, she's teaching me all this stuff on densities.
Translate that in your head to dimension. Basically, it breaks things into 7 densities or dimensions, and it preserves the word dimension for something else. But just realize when it's talking about space, time, and time-space, it's talking about the spirit world versus the physical world. When it's talking about densities, it's talking about kingdoms.
Yeah, okay. So when we're talking about dimensions, the way to break that down is degrees, right? So degrees of glory. So we can take densities, which means dimensions, which means degrees.
Yeah.
And so we're saying the same thing, just in a different way. So you have to be able to translate your LDS vernacular into this vernacular to just understand what they're saying, because they're saying the same thing, just using different English words.
Yeah. And then don't go bring this into elders quorum meeting or anything like that. But it will inform your LDS beliefs.
I love what you're doing here. You're talking about problems and contradictions because you're coming from an LDS background. And so you're also pointing out that just because you're reading the Law of One doesn't mean that 100% of what you're reading is absolutely true. And you're pointing out what you've found as some inconsistencies here. So you have to be able to detect and listen. I advise, if you're going to go down this path, go to the temple and start doing initiatories, because there's an amazing blessing that is giving in those initiatories where you can understand the difference between truth and error. And so as you read through this stuff, you need to be able to detect and listen. This is true for the Nemenhah record. This is true for any of these. If you're going to read the Discourse of Abaddon, or if you're going to read the Law of One, if you're going to read the Colburn, if you're going to read the Owaspy, if you're going to read any of these, you need that power to detect between truth and error if you're going to step into this. If you're not ready to step into this, I suggest stick with your Book of Mormon. If you're not totally ready, then just stick with the Book of Mormon. But if you feel like you're ready for more, if you've been praying and saying, I want more, there is more. Yeah. There is more.
Yeah. And go to that. Very great advice. Go to the temple, stay in the temple, and then ask, how does this fit with my beliefs? And you'll get there eventually. And if the Spirit tells you, hey, drop that for a while, you've attracted some attentions from some bad folks, just don't touch it for a while. Obey.
Totally. Okay. So go to his site. If you want to study this, Lance, do you listen to it or do you read the text? Are you kind of a reader or a listener, or both?
For this kind of stuff, I read. Yeah, but I kind of speed read, and then there's so many concepts that are so difficult. I guarantee if you first get in, I've been in this for like 20 years now, you're going to be, for the first 5 years, absolutely confused. You're going to make completely wrong assumptions. It's going to take some time to really work things out. So, drop some comments or something, to someone who's been in it for a while, if you have questions and how it fits with our version of the gospel, with our foundational concepts, which we should all agree on and stick to.
Love it. Okay. We're going to go ahead and wrap up. We're hitting our hour and 30, and we have another important interview with somebody claiming to be the Davidic servant. We have another Davidic servant on the line. We're going to bring him on. We're going to figure out what kind of downloads this Davidic servant is getting. We're going to find out if his name is David. If his name's not David, I'm a little, I don't know here. I think his name's Tom, but we'll see. Maybe Tom's middle name is David or something. So we're going to dig in. We're going to find out who this guy is. So we're going to go ahead and jump off here. But Lance, thank you so much. Again, thanks for being our tour guide on that trip to Mexico. What a time. I will be reliving those memories for the rest of my mortal probation. It was so fun. For myself, I'm Shane Baldwin. Oh, and by the way, listen, I don't know what's happened. I don't know if we've been shadow banned, but for whatever reason, we have hit 11,000 and it just went. And I don't know if it was our live stream with Mitiga that did it, but we're trying to get back on God's algorithm. We want to get back on that algorithm. So make sure if you like this video, share it, like it, post in the comments about it, do all of those things because it helps push these videos out. And I feel like this information, especially the information that was in this video, is very, very important to all of our progression and ascension. So for myself, I'm Shane Baldwin. For Trevor the Keys, David the Lion Douglas, and Lance Weaver, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you guys all next time.
Come together, searching for the way, guided by the Spirit, shining every day. Gather all the nations, call them to the fold, where Zion's truth and glory brighter than the gold. Seeking for the answers for what we never knew, finding in the spirit all things pure and true. Follow the spirit, follow the light, follow the truth. Don't lose your way, don't lose your spirit. Follow the light, follow the truth. It shines today. Gather all the nations, call them to the fold, where Zion's truth and glory brighter than the gold. Seeking for the answers for what we